The Crusades. Ah! If you are like me and have been taught that the Crusades uh, were something that Catholics should apologize for, that they're terrible and they're a stain on Catholic history, I want you to know that through the research I've done, I've found this to just be not true. And not only is it not true, but the Crusades were actually glorious. So the Crusades, crazy topic, war, death, money, land, and Jesus. How do these all fit together? And if you're like me and have had a few debates on the legitimacy of Christianity, uh, you know that the Crusades are often brought up as a stain on that Catholic tablecloth, so to speak. So my name is Ryan Peters. I'm a second-year Catholic missionary on college campuses with the Fellowship of Catholic University Students. And so as a missionary, I'm pretty much in any given day praying, researching, reading, talking to students about Catholicism, talking to my friends about Catholicism, or thinking about all the church teachings that I'm seeking to better understand. And so the Crusades, put lightly, has been tough for me because I grew up going to public school. And what I was taught there was that the Crusades were essentially a group of religious people trying to push their beliefs unjustly upon another peaceful group of religious people who were just massacred by the thousands and thousands and thousands. And that was a failed attempt to control their land. And I think this is the mindset and knowledge of the Crusades that many people grow up with today. Unfortunately, as I have grown in understanding of the topic, done my own research into it, looked at the history, it's just simply not true. Many have hurts or wounds or whatever it may be, from one religious person to a group to the church itself. So naturally, it's easy to speak out of these wounds. And I mean, if I hadn't dove into any of this research, I would still be under the impression that the Crusades were something to be apologized for. So understanding what I'm saying by stating the Crusades are glorious might sound pretty weird to most people. I know, I understand. We have to go to the meaning of the word glory, which whether or not the Crusades are even really worth mentioning at all in the debate. So in Steve Weidenkoff's book, The Glory of the Crusades, he states that the Hebrew word for glory is kabod, and I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly, bear with me, which means heavy in weight. If we take that to mean that in the modern sense, where the word is used very liberally, anything can be heavy, but usually when the term is used, it's describing talk or death or the universe or different realities. And I've heard people talk about the theory that we're all in a simulation. And one of my friends responded like, "Whoa, that's heavy." So do the Crusades fall into the heavy in weight category? Are they worth mentioning? So if the Crusades have kept people from diving into a religion which states in its very creed that belief in their creator is a matter of eternal life or not, yes, I would venture to say that that is heavy. So since they are heavy and worthy of mention, this carries a lot of weight in one direction or the other. If I am, constantly forced to apologize for the Crusades, I'm more tempted to believe that the church is not as valid in its teaching. If I know the truth of the Crusades, I know the history behind it, I'm more tempted to side with the church. So this is really the essence of the debate is because this is such a heavy topic and holds so much weight, where do we put that weight? So in a quote from Johann Lorenz von Mosheim, who was a German Lutheran historian, and this just kind of details more of the common, more of a modern view of the Crusades. He states that the Roman pontiffs and European princes were engaged at first in these crusades by superstition only, but when in the process of time they learned by experience that these holy wars contributed much to increase their opulence and to extend their authority, ambition and avarice seconded and enforced the dictates of fanaticism and superstition. So essentially, the Crusades were founded upon superstition and fueled thereafter by greed or avarice and fanaticism. So criticizing the church, especially in these ways, is not a new phenomenon. It's basically happened the whole time that the church has been around. So Weidenkoff writes in his book, and he also states something new that is occurring is the misuse of historical events to further a certain agenda. So writers like Hume, Voltaire, Diderot, and Edward Gibbon are among these writers. So what do they say about the Crusades? Weidenkopf has 7 main points, and we'll just, for the interest of brevity, focus in on 3 of those. One, the Crusades were wars of unprovoked aggression. This is something that I taught. I mentioned it in the religious beliefs being pushed on a group of people. So, also in the interest of brevity, I won't include all of the history here, but for those interested, you can find it in Weidenkopf's book, The Glory of the Crusades. Essentially, Islam, which started around 610 by Muhammad when he was given private revelations, and came to public around 613, and started teaching about this and really came to fruition by 622 AD. Fast forward to 700 AD, and nearly every single Christian stronghold in the Middle East had been taken by Muslims, and this was furthered by al-Hakim in 1009. He was kind of the main, I guess, sultan in Jerusalem, where a series of Christian persecutions really ensued. And in one of the most devastating events, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was destroyed, and Christians were essentially banned from using wine in the celebration of the Eucharist. So to say these were unprovoked is simply just unfounded if you look at the historical background. Secondly, is that the Crusades were motivated primarily by greed and the prospect for plunder and riches, which we read in that quote earlier. Weidenkopf also states 3 reasons why they were not fueled by greed, most importantly being that special privileges were granted, and most important among these was the granting of an indulgence, which, if you don't know what an indulgence is, it is a remission of the temporal punishment due to sins already forgiven in the sacrament of penance. Very important, very sought after. Yeah, just makes a lot of sense that you would typically want to take up your cross, so to speak, as these cruciadores would kind of move towards. And 3, that the Crusades were wars of conversion. And if there were wars of conversion, just the facts above wouldn't belie that. These were wars of a serious defense of the Christian life. So I'd like to share with you guys another story of Gunther, who was the Bishop of Bamberg, and he led a pilgrimage of 12,000 people to the Holy Land in 1065. And after a tough journey and indignation, and throughout all 12,000 were massacred by the Seljuk Turks, who had just taken to Sunni Islam, and they were only 2 days away from Jerusalem. So 12,000 people massacred, 12,000 Christians massacred. There's countless stories of this happening throughout the history of Islam, even with Muhammad himself being a real propagator of this. I think in his last words, he said something to the effect of, fight until all men are convinced of the one God, Allah. So just something, pretty fierce to leave as an end note in your life. So all of this culminated in the events of the Crusades after the Battle of Manzikert, which was called the shock that launched the Crusades. As the Seljuk Turks, who had adopted Islam, pressed into Byzantine to gain control of it, the new emperor, after they had captured and wounded the last emperor, sought help from the West. And who else would you turn to in the West but someone who had universal connections, or the Pope? And so this kind of is a skeleton of the true story of the Crusades, and nearly all of this information can be found in Steve Weidenkopf's book. Again, The Glory of the Crusades. It's a fantastic book, great read. He's very knowledgeable, graduate professor at Notre Dame, teaches church history. And if any of this information is new to you, and I know it was to me when I read this for the first time, I encourage you to educate yourself by buying this book, by looking at the true facts presented here and presented there in this brief speech even. And don't continue to buy into these false and anti-Catholic narratives presented in the common view of the Crusades. Don't allow these to be a stumbling block to your faith or to the faith of anyone else. Thanks for listening, and God bless.